Привет всем, добро пожаловать на мой канал. Я здесь, потому что я хочу сказать, что много интереснее, секретнее информацию. Я добавляю, я хочу дать вам интересная информация и включить субтитры, пожалуйста. А, включить субтитры, turn on subtitles, please. So, because I can't say the whole speech in Russian, it's too hard. So turn on subtitles, включить субтитры, пожалуйста, включить субтитры. Okay, so turn on subtitles. So, Hollywood, they are sick. Hollywood, I was meaning to be more eloquent the way I talked about this. The Hollywood rich elites, they are out of control. And, you know, when you go to an airport, right, they check everything. Why wouldn't the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and why wouldn't the Central Intelligence Agency be monitoring these crazy rich Hollywood elites? All these secret Hollywood parties that they're having. They can get away with anything. They do whatever they want. These rich Hollywood elites do whatever they want. And it's not right. Just imagine what these rich Hollywood elites are getting away with that we don't even know. So why isn't the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and why isn't the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, why aren't they doing their jobs? Why aren't they monitoring these rich elites? And so if you're Russian, also, I guess I have the same question for you. If you're Russian, in Russia, does Putin and the FSB, the Federal Security Service, the Federalная служба безопасности, does Putin and the FSB, the Federal Security Service, do they monitor the rich elites in Russia? Do they monitor the Russian rich elites? Do they monitor what those Russian oligarchs are doing with their money, right? They probably do, because I think Russia has higher standards. But the United States, the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the Central Intelligence Agency, they just let the rich elites get away with all of this evil stuff. They have these crazy Hollywood parties in which they do horrible things. Now, over the last 20 years, growing up in Canada, I have seen and heard a lot. There have been many leaks, many leaks of information. I remember seeing several things leaked on Facebook. I remember seeing several things leaked on other social media sites. So I've definitely accumulated a lot of information about Hollywood and the rich elites and the kind of stuff that they do at those crazy Hollywood parties. Have I ever been to one of those parties? No. But I mean, we kind of have an idea as Canadians what these crazy Hollywood rich elites are doing. And this is also to my point as to why Canada and the United States are more and more growing apart from each other and becoming distant from each other, because Canadians, a lot of Canadians are crazy. Don't get me wrong. There are crazy Canadians. There are rich elite Canadians, but then there's also a whole bunch of middle class Canadians who do not agree with what Hollywood does not agree with what the rich elites do, and are concerned and do not want to be part of the United States. No way, after seeing all of the corrupt, evil, gross things that the rich Hollywood elites do. So there are a lot of Canadians, and there could be a war between Canada and the United States. I don't see Russia as helping Canada. I don't see Russia and Canada being on the same page, to be honest. But China and Canada have always been very close allies. China and Canada have been extremely close I saw Chinese communist Chinese soldiers doing training exercises with Canadian soldiers. That's how close that China and Canada is to each other militarily. In fact, and I hate to let the Russians know this. I hate to let you know this, Russians, but maybe actually Canada is even closer to China, to be honest with you, than Russia's closer to China. I think maybe even it's possible that the relationship between Canada and China is actually stronger than the relationship between Russia and China. And let me explain why. Because Canada has always been a strategic country for China. Canada, being on the border of the United States of America, is a strategic country for China. Russia, you're right there. So, does China really care? China only wants to make sure Russia doesn't invade China. But in terms of a strategic country, the way that Canada is positioned, being on the border of the United States, makes Canada a very strategic country for China. Obviously, China could never penetrate the United States in the same way that they could penetrate Canada. Canada being more secluded, being having less resources, having less defense, having less money. Canada was definitely easier for China to corrupt than the United States. And that's why, remember, just a few weeks ago, they caught those two Chinese spies in the United States. There's Chinese spies all over Canada, and they're thriving. And they use Canada, they use the Canadian American border to get to the United States. Chinese spies go through Canada to get to the United States. So that's why, in many ways, Canada and China are actually more strategic allies than Russia and China. Because the truth also is that China, they will smile to your face and then they plot behind your back. That's exactly what Canadians do. That's literally the motto of Canadians is smile to your face and plot behind your back. And so Canada and China actually have very similar mindsets and very similar strategies and how they operate. That's literally like what Chinese people do. And if you talk to Chinese people, I have heard so many Chinese people say the same thing, that Chinese people are nice to your face, but and then will talk about you behind your back. They won't tell you to your face, they will talk behind your back. I've literally heard this said by Chinese people. It came right out of their mouths. And this is exactly what Canadians do. Canadians will lie to your face, be nice to your face, and then do stuff behind your back. And that's why the United States can never trust Canada. And Canada technically had a war with the United States. I mean, the only country I think that Canada's ever had like a major war with was the United States, and Canada won, right? So, for the fact of these crazy Hollywood rich elites in the United States, all this other crazy stuff with Americans, Canada is very much trying to distance themselves from the United States. The only reason why Canada ever said that they're allies with the United States was some sort of deception to trick the United States, to trick the Americans, into thinking that Canada was on America's side. But growing up in Canada, I have seen that the real ally of Canada has always been China. It's never been the United States. Because why do so many Canadians they defend China, but like sure, in the news, Canada will pretend as if they're against China. But I know so many Canadians that will fight for China and will do a disservice to the United States. Okay, so Canada and China, they really are allies, in my opinion. They're secret allies, and I gave a lot of good reasons that make sense, I think, as well. Now, the other issue, honestly, the other major issue between Canada and the United States is money. It's always been money. Money has been a major issue because Canadians, they don't like the fact that they see all of these rich Americans taking the money and like destroying the planet. And so that's a major issue for Canadians is like, but well, there's two types of Canadians. So not every Canadian is on China's side. I just want to say that a lot of Canadians are not on China's side. So that's why there's starting to become an issue between Canada, China, the United States, and Russia. This isn't a war thing. This isn't like, oh, a bunch of people who are like out for war. This is a money. This is a, the typical story of money corrupts people. And it does. I mean, Canada is like the king of scams. Canada runs all these scams, all of these call centers where they have Canadians trying to scam Americans. Like Americans don't even realize that half the people trying to scam Americans are Canadians. Canadians are constantly running scams against the United States. So this is why especially money is a major issue and not just about alliances and values. I really don't think Canada has values. I mean, Canada used to be this country where they took so much pride in keeping the water clean and keeping the air clean and keeping the country clean and fresh. But now, like Ontario, because of the immigration, has become one of the most polluted, disgusting provinces due to pollution. Severe pollution has polluted Ontario. And it's a lot of these immigrants and they're polluting the water. They're gonna make it like you know how in India they have a big pollution problem in India? Well, India is bringing that pollution problem to Canada. And they're taking this beautiful country, a land, the resources, trees, wind, beautiful, fresh, clean air, beautiful water, and they're turning it to like India. They're turning Canada into India. India, one of the most polluted, corrupt countries in the world for how much pollution there is in India. And what they're doing in Canada is they're making Canada like India. They're polluting Canada. It's really, really badly. They're polluting Canada. So that's a major problem in Canada right now. The pollution. Pollution is not like pollution affects everyone, by the way. It's not just the Canada problem. Because if the Canadian water supply becomes polluted, if the Canadian air becomes polluted, Canada's a huge country. It's not like we're just talking about like a small country. Canada is a huge country. So if Canada becomes polluted, it's going to affect the entire world. It's not just going to only affect Canada. And then the other issue too with the CIA is the Central Intelligence Agency. They are so easily corrupted. And the same with the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. In fact, Trump literally called out the FBI for being corrupt, right? He called out the CIA for being corrupt. These Hollywood TV shows, they're in a way, there is a war between Hollywood and the CIA and the FBI. There really is a war. Just go watch these TV shows, how they portray FBI agents and CIA agents. These Hollywood TV shows, they they make the CIA look like a bunch of bumbling idiots. They make the FBI look so corrupt. These Hollywood movies and Hollywood TV shows, they do not like the Central Intelligence Agency. They do not like the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Because anyone who watches these Hollywood TV shows and the Hollywood TV shows makes a good argument. They really show you how the FBI tells lies, how the FBI spins the story, how the CIA is corrupt, how that they sabotage other countries, they try to overthrow elections, they try to overthrow governments in other countries. That's what the Americans do. That's what the American CIA does. They're constantly trying to do regime changes. They're constantly trying to do these regime changes when the Americans probably should just mind their own business, really. And that brings us to 9/11. which is interesting, actually, something so I was reading a spy novel one time, and the spy novel was called The Tourist, and it was by Olin, I think Stein something, Steinbauer, maybe. Olin Steinbauer, I think. Anyways, the novel was called The Tourist. And in one of the chapters of The Tourist, they said something really interesting about the Twin Towers and 9/11. Apparently, the Twin Towers, one of them had a whole floor, a secret floor of the Twin Tower that was dedicated to the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency. That is big information. When I read that about that, and it's not saying that it's true. I'm saying it could be true because obviously the Central Intelligence Agency isn't just going to broadcast to the world whenever they have secret headquarters. Whenever the Central Intelligence Agency has a secret office, they're not going to broadcast that to the world. They're not going to tell the whole world where their secret offices are. So it's very possible that the Central Intelligence Agency did have a secret floor on the Twin Towers, on one of the Twin Tower buildings, which kind of then suddenly, like, hey, the Central Intelligence Agency has a whole floor on one of the Twin Towers. That adds a whole element of confusion and suspicion to what went down that day on 9/11. When you realize that it's very possible that the Central Intelligence Agency had a whole floor, right, on in the Twin Towers. And of course, see, this is what Hollywood does. This is what these book authors do. This is what these writers do, right? They can't just come out and say something, right? Sometimes they can't just come out and tell the public stuff. They can't really, they can't because it's too dangerous and they're worried about backlash. So instead, what these book writers do, is they put it in their novels, and suddenly it becomes part of a fictional story. But then you read it, and you're like, that makes a lot of sense. Maybe that's true. You're reading this fictional story. Suddenly, these fictional stories have a lot of interesting facts and theories and presumptions. And when you start reading them, you're like, well, that makes a lot of sense. In this fictional story makes more sense than the evening news. A fictional book, supposedly fictional spy novel makes more sense and makes more logic than the actual American news. And it would totally make sense that one of the Twin Towers would have a whole floor dedicated to the Central Intelligence Agency, because the Twin Towers were like these global business trade centers. Like, I would be actually shocked if the Twin Towers did not have a whole secret floor for the CIA, because it makes perfect sense. Because if you have the Twin Towers, which apparently, I was growing up at the time. I was still growing up when the Twin Towers, when the 9/11 happened, I was still growing up. But it makes sense because if you have these Twin Towers, which are like these global financial centers of the world, they're so famous and popular, and they're like the global financial centers of New York. It totally makes sense that the Central Intelligence Agency would have a secret floor on one of the Twin Tower buildings. That makes sense. Because the CIA, as we all know, as the Bush War and all of these American wars, they're all out for money. They've always been out for money. It's always been about money. So that was an interesting thing I read in a spy novel. And there's other things that I read in spy novels. Really interesting stuff, really interesting theories, and things that could very well be true and probably are true. Because I do feel like a lot of times, and they actually say it actually, a lot of times these spy novels, they're written by former spies. They're written by people who did actually formerly work for the CIA. Disgruntled employees, ex-employees of the CIA who were pissed off maybe because they were fired or because they were demoted or because they never even got the job. Maybe they were applied to the CIA and were rejected, but they were still more qualified. Whatever the reason, A lot of these authors, a lot of these writers, they actually are people like who work for the CIA. Maybe they did business with the CIA. Maybe they're Russian spies. So this information that you find in spy novels, a lot of it, not all of it. I mean, of course, they weave it into a fictional story. So of course there is a lot of semblance of fiction. There's a lot of fiction in these fictional stories as well. But they have these isolated facts, and then they have these mini stories which seem very like resemble real world events. Like so when you're reading these fictional novels, of course there is a large element of fiction, but there's also a large element of reality. And me having read so many spy novels, having read so many spy novels, I have accumulated so much information. And every time I do a live stream, well, not every time I do a live stream, every time that I do a live stream about this topic, right? Every time I do a live stream about the Central Intelligence Agency, I am going to keep on giving very interesting that I remember reading, things that I remember reading from these spy novels. For example, like the fact that apparently, allegedly, one of the twin towers, or both of them, had secret floors dedicated to the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency. So, um, JD Vance, Trump, right? They are so busy with Iran and the war. And there were all of these Iranian Canadians. They are talking so much, like they are bad mouthing the United States. Canada is full of Iranians. Like there are Iranians all over Canada. And they are not happy. They've never been happy. I mean, it's so easy to set these people off. I mean, they'll get mad over nothing. I mean, they get mad over a cartoon drawing. If you have like this cartoon drawing of Mohammed, right? Just for drawing their Mohammed in a funny way, they'll get mad. These people will get mad. So, you know, I actually, for many, I actually believe a lot of the news is fake. I do. I don't believe it's real. A lot of the news I believe is fake. But, you know, the Twin Towers and 9/11 and these Muslim extremists, and they wear burqas and you could see them wearing hijabs, these people are nuts. And I can actually see that this is real. This part of the war is real. I do think that the Iranian war is real. I think it's real. I don't believe everything I hear in the media. I don't believe all the wars I see. But I do think that this Iranian war is weird, real, not weird. I do believe that this Iranian war is real. And unfortunately, I'm a very peaceful person. I like peace, and I don't like seeing war happen. But especially these Iranians, like with all these hijabs that they wear and burqas, they look scary. And they have this crazy ideology. So I can totally see why Trump would want to, do something about these people. So